Hello, welcome to Israel Reclaiming the Birthright. I'm your host, Ron Singer. We're on Lesson 3. It's July 31st, 2023, right after Shabbat Nachamu. This is Lesson 3. We discussed the issue of authority and the tikkun of Adam. So we know that God is a God of truth. Isaiah in Chapter 65 tells us that. So how is it possible that after all these millennia, Israel, secular and religious, are still under the influence of the clever serpent who beguiles us into following our own ideas, feelings, thoughts, and rebelling against the God of truth, who is our true authority, and the only authority which will bless Israel and which will guarantee our continuity as a people and in the land that he's just returned us to. Well, we have to make this tikkun. There's no question about it. So we've already covered the verses that prove that the written Torah is the way to go, and any modification comes from the Tanakh, the words of the prophets, and we have to study this. So let's just cover a couple of paradigms in Genesis and see where we've gone wrong and what we need to correct. Judaism is a path of enlightenment. We go from limping through history like Yaakov. We go to Israel, where God is our ruler. We go to Yeshurim, where we're straight with God. We go to the consciousness of Ariel, where each of us is burning with the Eshdat, the fire of truth, God's Torah, to where we become really enlightened as Emmanuel, when God can actually dwell amongst us. And what we know from the Torah is that the Torah will actually teach us what God really wants of us so that we can be holy by pleasing him. And that's why we have the commandment, thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And we're warned not to run after the sight of our eyes, our feelings, our thoughts, anything that detours us from what God tells us he wants us to do. And if we do this, and if we incur the curses that are found enumerated in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 7, and especially Deuteronomy 28, we know we have to do a performance evaluation and get back on track and find the truth of God and correct ourselves. Now, in the nuclear family, we have a function that helps us to do that. The male is the Zachar, meaning Zocher, remember. The female is Nekeva, meaning she's Kav and Kavanah. She's on line with God subliminally and intuitively, and she understands God's intention. It's the two of them that need to correct each other so that the children they have do better than Avram's children and Isaac's children. So what did Avram do wrong? Avram was told that he was going to be blessed and he didn't have to worry about anything. He was going to have to be a blessing to everyone. And then when he went down to Egypt, he asked Sarah to pretend to be his wife, his sister. This was a lack of faith in God. When God speaks to you, you should be 100% golden courage. And Avram failed. And even after God promised that Sarah would have a child, when it came to Avimelech, he asked Sarah to once again say that she's his sister. And Avimelech called him on it. And Avram wasn't a good father. He wasn't a good husband. He was told regarding the issue of Hagar and Ishmael to listen to the voice of his wife. God told him that. So when God wanted to test his faith again and ask him to sacrifice Isaac, he really should have spoken to Sarah. This was another big sin in my opinion. And after the angel told Avram to free Isaac and he saw the ram, no one said he had to sacrifice the ram. He could have done the same thing that God did for Isaac to the ram. Release the ram. Because after all, we are supposed to be vegetarian. Anyway, it doesn't end there. His son Isaac is also bereft of the faith. Isaac and Rivka are before Avimelech, and he asks Rivka to say that she's his sister. But Avimelech sees them, and he calls Yitzhak on it, and he says, "What is this? Someone could have taken her." And Isaac says a really interesting thing. He says, "I didn't think there was fear of God in this place." Well, where was your fear of God, Isaac? God just told you that you would be inheriting all this land, that your seed would be a multitude, and still you had no faith in God? You feared an external power? Avram was supposed to be the antidote to tyrants. He was supposed to prove that by fearing God and obeying the one authority on earth, the God of truth, that tyranny would be obliterated from the world. And he failed, Isaac failed, Jacob failed, and all of us failed. But Judaism is a path. And on the path we go from Yaakov. Yaakov actually starts it because he sees that he has to fear God. And he does, to some degree. We go from Yaakov limping through history to Israel, the new name for Yaakov, which means God is our ruler, to Yeshurun, which means that we, the people of Israel, are straight with God, to Ariel, to where the truth of God burns in our breasts to do his will and be the holy nation of priests that he's commanded us to become. And then we become Emmanuel. Emmanuel means that God dwells amongst us and animates every fiber of our bodies and souls. So this is the Jewish path. Where are we today? I don't have to tell you, just look around. I want to take a little detour and explain what's happening with this issue of rebellion in Israel today. The serpent is still winning. He's beguiling us. The serpent makes everyone think that it's about the Supreme Court when it's not about the Supreme Court. Everyone left and right knows full well that this particular Israeli Supreme Court made a mockery of democracy. There is no Supreme Court on the face of the earth in any democratic republic that operates as a tyrannical entity that can nullify the will of the people, its elected leaders, just because they feel like it, because it's unreasonable to them what we've decided. So everybody knew this. But what happened is there was an election, a fair, free, legal election where the right wing of Israel was staunchly elected. And the left couldn't take it. The liberals couldn't take it. They made a government with 5 Arab parties, including those that advocate terrorism. And that was okay. But if the right wing is made up of religious parties, well, that's no good to them. So what's the background to this? Let's look, because there's an understanding here. And, you have to understand that Rav Kook saw these things, and he's a good one to study. Our rabbis don't teach Tanakh. There are two that did. There was Rabbi Kahana and Rav Kook. In their yeshivas, in the Merkaz Harav, Tanakh is taught. That's what you're going to learn here on Israel Reclaiming the Birthright, because for 2,000 years, we've been ignoring God's judgment of history. Samson Raphael Hirsch, the greatest commentator, said two things you need to remember. Adam made the first sin by adding the first addition to God's law. And he said that history is God's judgment. Well, we're a nation whose leaders never made a performance evaluation after Joshua. And it's time for us to do it. It's time to stop lying that the historical horrors that befell us aren't curses but tests. They're curses. They're itemized in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 7, and Deuteronomy 28. And we need to look at those critically and correct our behavior and demand the corrections of our leaders, especially our rabbis. Now, these secular Jews who are opposed and violently opposed and want to overthrow this government as an insurrection, you should hear the leaders, the failed leaders, the prime ministers, the military chiefs, the intelligence chiefs. These are all descendants of the immigrants that came to Israel in the 1880s after Tsar Alexander II was assassinated because he wanted to release the serfs that other monarchs in Europe didn't want to have to do. So the Jewish intellectuals and the Russian intellectuals, they work together hoping to make a utopian socialist world. A Jewish idea from the Torah. Anyway, after the assassination, a scapegoat was found, and lo and behold, it was because of the Jews. The pogrom started, the Russian intellectuals attacked their Jewish counterparts, and the Jewish counterparts, the ancestors of these rebels today, moved to Israel, rolled up their sleeves, got their fingers dirty, dug, built, planted, fought, bled, died, and they created an amazing country, the likes of which never was created in the history of mankind at this speed. And they did it while the monarchs, and we know the families, were sabotaging us all along from the very beginning, especially from the Balfour Declaration, but that's a whole other history. So what's the issue here? The religious parties are in favor of maintaining yeshivas funded by tax money. This means that full-grown, able-bodied men sit all day long, all their lives, and feed at the expense of the public. And they don't serve in the army because they have to study. And what are they studying? The Tanakh? Absolutely not. They're studying the same stuff which is not from the truth of God. We can learn things from the Talmud, and we should learn how the Talmud contradicts the truth of God all through the Tanakh, and correct that and our religious leaders so that we can finally do what God says, become the chosen holy people, make the tikkun of Adam, and fix the world. Anyway, how it's going to end, my guess is the Mashiach will come, because nobody knows why they're doing it. They don't know that they're still under the influence of the serpent, because they all think they're doing what's right in their own eyes, and no one is checking with what God wants. Certainly not the secular, because of the, there's so much corruption amongst the religious community there. We had our two religious affairs ministers that were embezzling funds on top of what they got that was agreed upon, that these secular Jews cannot stand them, and they so hate the religious that they will dafka, deliberately eat pork, and not only any day, but on Yom Kippur. So these people would rather bring down the entire country than let these people rule them any longer. They can't abide it any longer. And I understand that. It doesn't make them right. But who's supposed to have some wisdom here? Not Bibi Netanyahu. He's not saying anything like this. It's certainly not coming from the religious leaders. We're looking for a compromise. What's the compromise? How about a little truth, shining the light of truth on everything? No, nobody ever does that. Just like 2,000 years ago, the Sadducees, the priests, who in the Haftorah Toledot, we see in Malachi, the lips of the priests are guarding the truth, are supposed to tell the truth. How come they didn't start shouting that the Torah Sheba'al Peh that was invented by the Pharisees was a big lie? Because it was good for them. Didn't matter to them. They were in good terms with everybody. The Romans let them do their thing. They were making money hand over fist from pilgrims coming to Jerusalem to buy sacrificial animals, which meant that they had to change their currency into local currency. A lot of money is made doing that. Why rock the boat? The only really good actors were the Essenes, frankly. They knew that trouble was coming. They left town and they started copying the Holy Scriptures. They put them in urns, sealed them up for the future. And of course, they were found a little while ago in 1947 in Qumran, in the Judean mountains. Incidentally, there was one Essene who didn't want to go write scriptures. He was a man named Jesus. He's known by most of the world, Jesus, Yeshu, Yeshua. Shmuley Boteach, the rabbi who wrote Kosher Jesus, got me on the trail of saying, let's see what's going on with this. So I did a lot of studying of real scholars. Geza Virmes, who translated the Dead Sea Scrolls into English, an English scholar named Brandon, Bart Ehrman, an American scholar. It turns out that maybe Jesus was a zealot. And there were plenty of zealots there, and the Romans crucified them. But he was also someone who was teaching the written Torah, which according to our Pharisees, the progenitors of our rabbis, was a big no-no, because he had a following. So one of the things we have to do is to accept the fact that we made a mistake vilifying this patriot. The Christians, you Christians, have to realize that you have no clue who this man is. Constantine turned him into what Paul turned him into by lying, making him into some Lord of glory, something that he wouldn't like to hear. And Constantine needed a pagan religion for all his diverse pagans to create some kind of unity in his turbulent, declining Roman Empire in the 4th century. But anyway, that's another thing. Just wanted to make a little correction of history for those who can stomach that. I grew up hating them also because I was a refugee, and in the Bronx you fought with all the goyim after football games, after baseball games. They were all very bloody to begin with, and after the Jews won, which we always did almost, we won every fight afterwards because the Irish and the Italians couldn't stand it that the Jewish team beat them. Anyway, so I was a refugee, and I was hated because we killed their God. That's what they yelled at us on Easter and on Christmas. And after that, we were friends again to some degree. But forget about it. We don't have to convince you. We don't have to convince anybody. All we have to do is finally do what God wants. He will bless us abundantly. The world will know what it says in Deuteronomy 28:10. Vayiru amei haaretz kishem Adonai nikra elecha v'yaru mimecha. The nations of the world will see that the name of God is called upon us because we're so blessed with a quality of life that even the greatest tyrants today can't even buy with all their trillions, and they will fear us because ultimately we're the ones that not only enlighten by proving that in living according to God's Torah, we have a birthright of miraculous blessings that gives us an unsurpassed miraculous quality of life, but we're also the liberators of the world that free the world from tyranny. And this time, God wins. And that's why we're really hated on the higher level by the big players on the global arena. And that's why they want to eliminate us today. That's why they set up Iran. Going back, it's a long history, maybe for another time, but make no mistake about it. Israel is on the bullseye, and this agitation today is not a good thing. I mean, the only thing that consoles me really is that when it came to Gideon, God only wanted a small number of soldiers, 300, to defeat all of our enemies. He didn't want all the 10,000. So, I mean, the victory is God's anyway. I know that from my life, and I know that some of you know that from your life. So let us finally turn to the Tanakh, start reading little by little, and get it right. And remember that God is a God of truth, and we have to overcome the negative inclination to compete with God. We don't want the serpent to rule us. How do we do this? We have to pay attention. We have to remain awake. We have to track the negative impulse as it enters our mind. And then we have to put it aside. Oh, I understand. I see you're the serpent in my mind. Goodbye. And then you move forward, loving God with all your heart, soul, and might, so that ultimately you do His will, you become holy, you're blessed, the whole world sees us blessed, and everything proceeds according to the prophecies of the Tanakh. And make no mistake about it, God wins. So you seculars out there who hate everything because you don't like the way the religious behave, we all understand you, okay? Some of us came from that. And you religious who think you're smug and better than everybody else because you follow the religion, you're following a false religion based on an oral Torah that was a big lie to begin with and a detour from the truth of God, which the Sadducees should have corrected 2,000 years ago but didn't. So you may ask, why did God let the Pharisees win and have hegemony over the people? What choice did he have at the time? The Sadducees were too corrupt. The Essenes left the scene. And the only other people were the Pharisees. And for them, the destruction of the temple was the perfect storm. They took control of us and never let go. Unfortunately, they did not care enough about us, not even of their own women, to correct themselves, to do a performance evaluation, and to lead us back to God, the God of truth. And this is really what we have to do today. We must do this. And at the same time, you have to love your neighbor as yourself. Don't run away, don't hide. Talk to your fellow secular Jews. Explain to them what you can. But do it. Don't try to win an argument. Just, let the love of God for all the beauty of His creation emanate out of you to your brothers and sisters. And then open your mouth. And think. Even ask God, what should I say now? Please talk for me. Miracles happen. I've seen so many miracles that, for me, the truth of God is inescapable. And I wish for you the same thing, and I know some of you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, we're going to end this lesson number 3. And the takeaway thing is we have to have faith in God, which our patriarchs failed to have, unfortunately. I mean, in the case of Abraham, when God told him that, again, toward the end, that he would inherit all the land, that his progeny would be, would be like the stars of heaven. You couldn't count them. He accepted that. But when God said, you're going to inherit all this land, then he wanted to know, how do I know that? So God told him how he'd know that. He told him to get a couple of animals, light a fire, put Avram into a sleep, and he said, you know what? Your descendants are going to be slaves in a strange land for 400 years, and they are going to be so enslaved, and then I'm going to do something miraculous. I'm going to free them from the world's greatest superpower, and then I'm going to bring them back to their own land, which is, an impossibility under normal conditions in the world. And then we'll know how we're going to inherit this land, because God is going to prove himself in this way. He had to lower his expectations. He had to put us through a lot of turmoil and torture. And, that's what we call upon ourselves by not having faith in God. So let's have faith in God. Let's do what he says. Let's diligently study the Tanakh as much as possible. We have good minds, most of us. We can talk to each other. Other people can get on YouTube and Instagram and give talks and stuff, and more power to you. Please do so. And if you like these YouTube videos, please pass them around, because we have to wake up. We are literally in the bullseye of the tyrants of the world, of the Nimrods, of the Amalekites that want to make us doubt the existence of God and become one of them, which would be easy to do, but God will never let us do that. So give it up. Do what God wants, and we will win with God fighting for us. So have a good afternoon, have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.